Hello ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. Can any form of legacy content ever truly be considered extremely difficult in World of Warcraft? I mean, it could be any form of content, it could be open world, it could be in dungeons, but I guess when people talk about legacy content, and I was originally going to name this video about legacy content, but I pretty much accepted that I'm basically just talking about raids at the end of the day. So yeah, raids. Is there ever going to be an exceptionally hard raid in our classic timeline? Not only just potentially in Classic itself, but what about the Burning Crusade, or even Wrath of the Lich King? Or is it going to be this constantly ever revolving door of, no, just you wait and see, the insert next raid, wow, that's the big one, that's the one that's going to put a lot of people to the test, the insert current raid was always easy, just like back in the day. It's probably going to be that way for a good while, if I'm completely honest, given the expectations that have been set so far. What does hard even mean for raids though? I mean, Blackwing Lair has proven to be statistically more difficult than Molten Core was, and AQ40 more so than Blackwing Lair, as per the last video. And I'm in no doubt that Naxxramas will continue that trend onwards, with each subsequent tier having fewer and fewer early full clears. But that's just going off the metrics which are available to us. You could have totaled 20 or 30 wipes through your first AQ40 clear over 2 different raid nights, and then come out the other end thinking, wow, that was tough, but I mean, at the end of the day, you've cleared the entire raid, a new raid for all intents and purposes, in 2 raid nights. How many wipes did you have total on that one boss which was most difficult for you to take down? 7, 8, 9, 10 perhaps? I'll admit though, especially in AQ40, the run back is the real killer, especially wiping on Twin Emperors without mounts. Your character's going to be doing some serious cardio to get back there again. There isn't just only the time investment, but also consumables in Classic, which are incredibly important, which you can absolutely demolish when you are wiping a lot. But then again, they do just sort of cover mistakes and ease the learning curve, instead of being an absolute necessity, at least at this point in time. Back in vanilla, Naxxramas was held in such incredibly high regard due to the tiny proportion of raiding guilds even seeing the inside of the instance and getting a few bosses down, let alone the dream of getting a full clear and seeing some of that fabled Crusade loot. Naxxramas was a bit of a change in philosophy at Blizzard as well though, which also added to this new level of difficulty. Bosses were more so designed in a way that expected your players to be popping consumables as a requirement in order to defeat them, like tanks needing titans and armor pots on Patchwork, greater shadow protection potions and other self-healing items on Lower Theb, frost protection potions and stacking loads of frost res gear on Sapphiron, and there were far more player responsibility checks, the person in control of the mind controls on Resuvius, positioning on Thaddeus or Anubra Khan, staying well spread on Crusade. This was one of those few times Blizzard would design a raid with the idea players would be to some extent required to make use of all the different buffs for progression. And then there was suddenly the fact that you out of the blue needed 8 tanks for 4 horsemen, 8 very geared tanks, ideally who all have the Pagel trinket from ZG. You can only imagine how rough this would have been to progress naturally back in the day. Nowadays though, everything's known really. You'll probably get a bit of a wake up which players are spur baggage in your raid by this point though, in Molten Core and Blackwing Lair, and for the most part in AQ40 you can just bring along warm bodies to fill the spots and you're fine. This will have a little bit of a change up in tier 3. Despite all this though, will Naxxramas only be cleared by the elite few in Classic? Will people in full tier 3 be gods walking amongst men? Nah, no chance. It'll be harder than Blackwing Lair, it'll be harder than AQ40, but far from something that's truly a challenge that can be appreciated long term. It's not just the fact that raids are well figured out at this point, we're playing the most powerful versions of our characters to ever have existed in vanilla. However, we are getting closer and closer to meeting at a crossroad with a patch that the content we will be doing is on and what we are actually on. So what I mean is that being Nax was released as of patch 1.11 on June 19th, 2008, whilst we are a little bit ahead still on 1.12, which was the 22nd of August 2008. And I did have a little skim through the 1.12 patch notes as far as class and itemization changes, which could have had a significant impact on your class, and there wasn't overly too much there which functionally changed anything gameplay wise. I'll give you a quick rundown of the patch here as well. This means finally the whole we are playing with incredibly buffed talents, class abilities and updated itemization argument isn't really going to be a thing anymore, and still I think Nax isn't going to be all that much of a struggle after the first few weeks. since the content is just so well known inside out. I mean, when you compare raiding difficulty on the retail version of the game, it's truly a night and day experience. Say what you like about the current state of retail at the moment, but Blizzard knows how to tune boss fights to offer a real challenge. They pretty much have always done so since they really started investing into the idea that there should be top-end PvE content that is very difficult, without the difficulty being solely in gold investment on consumables or time preparation on resistance gear, which I would say started to happen about halfway through Wrath of the Lich King or so. When I think about difficulty on retail, you have the likes of Yogg Zero Lights, Firefighter, Heroic Ragnaros, Heroic Spine of Deathwing, Garrosh Heroic, Mythic Blackhand, Mythic Archimonde, Mythic Kil'jaeden, Pre-nerf Mythic Jaina, or Ashara. Each of these fights could take the best guilds in the world hundreds and hundreds of attempts for that one world first kill, as well as some of these fights lasting up to 15 minutes of perfected mechanics by up to 25 players in some of the earlier raids. There's even a Hall of Fame achievement for the first 100 guilds on each faction to land a kill on some of these mythic end bosses, which gives a special title, and sometimes those slots aren't filled out for months and months after the mythic launch. This is somewhat because there are vastly fewer high-end guilds on Alliance. A quick segue actually, now that I mention that. Remember how we're going into an expansion in TBC where the faction ratios become very imbalanced? Here's the long-term effects of what that does. Horde Hall of Fame for the latest raid completed 15th of March 2020. Alliance 14th of April 2020. Horde 1,295 clears on the final boss in Mythic. Alliance 608. 1 month behind for the top 100 and less than half the full instant clears. Imagine that Blizzard actually pulled a fresh start for TBC 2. The game would only have one faction. Even as a die-hard Alliance player, there comes a point where it's a struggle to get into good guilds if the player base is just that low on your faction. Anyways, back on track. If Classic is anything to go by with the whole just you wait and see, the next raid is going to be the super hard one, I think this has ended up being quite the cautionary tale for TBC, especially when in TBC there is a much easier job of getting the content difficulty right, because there are no world buffs to worry about, there's no excessive consumable stacking to worry about, it's just flask food potions for the most part. There's actually a possibility that we would launch with the final patch class and itemization balancing, raid and dungeon nerfs, and quite literally have over half the content in the game, including Mag and Gruul's Lair, SSC, TK, and Hyjal from launch, which would be just a complete disaster in my opinion. Even if the content were more spread out, us being on the last patch versus nerfed content, I mean, well, we've just seen exactly how that goes in Classic. Sure, one raid may be harder than the next, but if you are getting past any obstacle in a couple of pulls or a few raid nights maximum, it does leave a bit to be desired from the difficulty and makes it a bit less interesting. In fact, if we carry on with our current format for releases and content, the first raid that may be genuinely difficult could be the Sunwell, because just like Blizzard did with Naxx, they tuned it around the fact that you have to min-max quite a bit more, except much more so than it was the case with Naxxramas. The whole Drums of Battle meta, which is spread even to the starting level raids now in TBC, was built there, especially on Muru, an ever so much hyped up boss fight that was really just trying to desperately take down ads before the next wave spawns and just completely overwhelms you. But looking even further ahead to Wrath of the Lich King, the first tier was notoriously easy, with revamped Naxxramas, Sarfarian's Lair, and Malagos and Eye of Eternity being taken down literally days after launch, even fewer days than it took for the world first raid clearing Classic. And they were going in blindish, and I say blindish because Naxx was quite similar. Ulduar had its hard modes, like Freya with Old Keepers, destroying Heart XT, Firefighter, Zero Lights and so on, as did Trial of the Crusader. Oh boy, who can't wait for Trial of the Crusader again? I actually didn't mind it that much. I even thought the faction champions was pretty cool. ICC had real heroics though, the likes of Putricide, Sindragosa and the Lich King, of course, were notoriously hard, even back in the day, right? I did have a stream recommendation pop up randomly the other day of a guild doing ICC 10-man heroic, and they were just sort of walking through it and making it look like normal mode, honestly. Then again, that level of efficiency no doubt comes with a great deal of experience. That's just the thing though, if it's not our gear or our talents that's making it easy, it's having all the info available online on how to do it, right? Is it though? In retail, there is a dungeon journal telling you what bosses do in advance and how much damage they do. DBM tells you bosses' cooldowns from the moment it's live on the server. You have weak auras and no doubt a vocal person helping out with calls in your raid, and you will still wipe again and again and again on the hardest encounters. There comes that one moment, and I bet you can relate here if you've raided Heroic back in the day or Mythic more recently, where there is a boss you've struggled on for dozens and dozens of attempts, maybe even hundreds, and then suddenly everything works out magically. The right people get the personal responsibility mechanics, you hit the damage checks, you don't have any bad RNG, and the boss goes down. It's amazing. It's one of the best feelings in raiding. And then you come back next week and you one-shot the boss and think, wow, how was this ever so hard for us? It's like preparing for anything, an exam, an interview. You can have it all in your head, but until you are at a point where you need to perform, you just don't know how it will go, and you can't beat first-hand experience, no matter how much you know theoretically. This is where it can come heavily down to who are you raiding with? Have they done it many times before? Chances you can pretty much just get carried, or are you returning or a new player? Well, there's that time for you to learn here then. Time will tell, of course, as to what gear exactly we have and how raids will be tuned, though the N-tier raids should always prove to be the greatest challenge simply because our power level will be most closely matched to the actual release date of the content. As for whether old raids can ever prove a true challenge, well, even if you spend a few days on your first clear, a clear is a clear, then again, maybe that's what suits you best for your free time these days. For Classic, in a more casual guild, seeing all the content is definitely more accessible than it's been so for a very, very long time on retail at the top end. But for those seeking a real difficulty spike in raids, even in later expansions, I don't think it will ever truly measure up to expectations that were set back in the day. I think if you want a challenging raid experience, you may just have to go to retail. Let me know your thoughts, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one very soon. If you like what you see, do give the video a like and subscribe, as there will be plenty more to come. Take care guys, and I'll see you in the next one very soon.